afternoon. My name is Hope Wright, and I'm an actor-interpreter here at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation.
And I'm Janae Whitaker. I'm milliner and mantua maker here at the museum. And today we are broadcasting from the millinery shop here on Duke of Gloucester Street. Hope and I this winter have been part of a really wonderful collaboration between our two departments. We all research, and one of the things we found out is that we were both researching the runaway newspaper advertisements. As a trades historian, I look at these advertisements for the variety of clothing, the colors, the fabrics, and sometimes even the construction details that are mentioned.
And in looking at these runaway ads, I'm looking at them for clues about the lives of these enslaved women that were seeking to self-liberate. So you find out just, the height of these women, the complexion of their skin, the color, and the texture of their hair. You find out that some of them were punished and still bore the marks of that punishment that were visible, even clothed. You find out about family connections, which is something that's very interesting. A lot of people, when they're running in the 18th century, are running to family or other relations as there's slavery in all the colonies. So you find out, where their mothers, their fathers, their children, their siblings are. So these are just some of the things that I found out in looking at these. And I want to say that as we have been looking at these ads and finding out a lot, it brings up oftentimes a lot more questions. So I know that as you watch, you'll have questions, but you can send them in at any time if you have questions about some of the research our departments have done.
Right. This research has culminated in a program that we've been doing this winter called She Had On When She Ran Away. And to me, one of the most sobering parts of it is the realization that this one paragraph or two paragraphs is the only information we have about the entire life of a person. But it's wonderful that we have that information as well. We got a chance to make all the clothing that was mentioned in 3 runaway advertisements. And to me, one of the biggest things I learned was the respect of the amount of weight of clothing these women seems to have been taking away with them. The weight of the clothing, but also the amount of clothing. And it brings up a whole idea of that clothing being valuable to the 18th century world. And that would have given an opportunity for them to be able to sell it or trade it so that they could, maybe finance their travels.
Do something to change their appearance. And oftentimes as people are running, they're running in groups, change outfits with people that you're running away with. So it becomes a very important integral part to the self-liberation that these women were seeking to do.
Now, on the flip side, sometimes the descriptions are so good that you think, oh, I know exactly what they were wearing. And in this case, this was one of them. It's a blue silk, so it's a sarcenet trimmed in gauze, and the description says white ribbon sewn to it. So we made this one and then thought, there's about 4 or 5 different ways that the sarcenet, the gauze, and the ribbon could have been accurately and authentically created. So yes, many times there's more questions than we have answers to. Also, what's missing?
That's true. That's true. One of probably the most well-known pictures is music and dance in Beaufort County, South Carolina, which is John Rose. And that's something that a lot of people are familiar with. There are these men and women, and especially the women, and looking at the clothing they're wearing, these vibrant colors, the gowns, which are definitely fitted. So you know that these women are wearing stays, which are these fitted garments that give us our shape. But in all the runaway ads that I've looked at, so hundreds, if not thousands, it's very rare that you see stays listed, or specifically a woman listed as wearing stays,
Right.
As she is seeking to,
Right.
to self-liberate. So, you know that they're wearing them by the shape of the clothing, but it's not always supported
Right.
in what's written.
What's missing. Also, the picture of the planter, his wife, and servant from the Caribbean, the servant looks truly like she's just wearing a jacket and petticoat. And sometimes these advertisements just list the jacket and petticoat. And so you don't know whether to take it literally or to think about the person who's writing the advertisement not thinking the detail. Maybe it was too expensive to write everything in to the advertisement. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true too. Is these advertisements, they would cost, the length of the advertisement would be a cost, and also how often these advertisements ran in the newspaper. So sometimes you see people that have run away listed time and time again over periods of weeks and months. Sometimes they're listed once, and that's really the only thing you have of these individuals.
Yeah. And you truly hope that they were successful
Yes.
and all.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. Our next favorite picture is Mrs. Jones.
Mrs. Jones,
Mrs.
Miss
Jones.
Breamy Jones.
Uh-huh.
And I especially love this one because in the ad that I picked, that I perform as Betty, and she had on when she went away. One of the things that Betty was listed as running away in was this blue and white striped gown. So I got this blue and white striped gown made by Janae and Rebecca, our other milliner, with fabric that was made by our weavers here. And it's the same as this, what this woman is wearing. And so she was captured, which sometimes it's the written word which is captured, but once in a while we get a likeness, a drawing, a sketch that's captured. So I especially like that one because it's very personal.
My favorite dress.
Yes,
My favorite
yes.
dress, yeah. But another thing is the advertisements, no matter if it's a runaway wife or apprentice or a servant or an enslaved woman, when they describe the clothing, they might say blue and white striped cotton or red and white printed calico. And they're the same across. There does not seem to be a great deal of differentiation, at least in the written word, of what someone who's free or perhaps someone who is enslaved is wearing.
And I think that's the product of very good research, because I have been here a very long time. And I remember very early on when I came here and I was working at Carter's Grove slave quarters. And we weren't in character when we were there, so we were speaking as we are now in the present day. And I remember the majority of my allotment of clothes being about like this, which, they're very nice, they're well constructed, but a brown, a beige, a taupe, and I only had three things that I had: a head wrap, I had a jacket, and I had an apron that I think were all kind of like a pink or something. So there was the assumption that this is what the outfits were. This is what the clothing was. Yeah. But in looking at runaway ads, as I was discussing with Janae, I just took a running list of all the different colors of petticoats, of jackets, of head wraps. You're talking about dozens for each different type of cloth. So the reason we have these ads is very hard, and there's always a certain bias attached to them, but it gives us a lot of valuable information about these women. I mean, very detailed information that we might not have had otherwise.
The last picture we have to share is of the poetess Phyllis Wheatley, and she is completely dressed in English style. She's also wearing all the millinery, the cap, the neck handkerchief, the ruffles, the apron, probably even a tucker, the neck and the neck handkerchief. And many times when you see pictures of enslaved women, they're not wearing all that millinery.
Like Mrs. Brimmy Jones, I believe she just had the apron,
And
but
a
and
kerchief.
a kerchief,
Yeah.
but not a cap, not a ribbon on the cap, not ruffles on the gown.
Yeah.
What you also see very common, especially in paintings and prints from the Caribbean, is instead of the caps, the head wraps. So this is something that's definitely a cultural retention, and that you would see women, especially if they're working away from a domestic setting, away from in the house, something that you see them wearing, and something that you see them preferring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have had a lot of fun with this project, and hope to expand it even farther, and also expand it to perhaps a little earlier in the 18th century, and perhaps even later in the
Yeah.
18th century as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of women with stories who are waiting to be told. Janae mentioned we have three women, so you all are still able to come see us on Wednesdays throughout the month at the Hennage Auditorium at 1:30. But like, for instance, the woman who I'm portraying, Betty, and there's a little portion of the Runaway ad that you all should be seeing. If you'd like to see the complete Runaway ad, it is on the Geography of Slavery, which is a free and accessible website. But with hers is so interesting. This is the only mention that I have of Betty. I searched for her in the records of John Newton. I've been able to find out that he was a cousin of Robert Carter III, and find out where his plantation was on the banks of the Potomac. But not much about Betty. We have this really good description of her and the clothing she's wearing. But in talking about family connections, we don't know who she's running to, but who she's running with was something that was very striking to me. She's running with an indentured servant man named John Grocott, who was found guilty of a pretty serious crime, of stealing a horse, and sentenced to death. He ended up being sentenced to being a servant, indentured servant in Virginia for 14 years. And this free man, a sailor, William Wood. So anytime a woman is seeking to self-liberate, there is a risk taking. But for Betty to run with these two men, potentially, on a boat, to seek her freedom, is just something amazing to me. So like we were talking about research earlier, the more information you have, the more questions there are to be answered. So that's something that I'm still pursuing and actively looking for more information about Betty on.
Yeah. Maybe the Old Bailey records will give you more information about William. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah, Janae and Hope, thank you so much. In looking at all of these ads and seeing all these descriptions of clothing that was either worn or just carried away with people, is there a sense of who owned those articles?
Yeah, according to our Colonial Williamsburg historians, by 18th century tradition, these clothes given to the enslaved population belonged to them. Now, take note that I said by tradition, it was not written down. So you begin to wonder whether, someone might have wanted to take possession of them.
And when you look at runaway ads, they tend to be very descriptive of the clothes that these women wear. But you do see distinctions being made where an advertisement will say, she wore this, describing her outfit, but also was stolen at the same time. And that could be anything from clothing, a mixture of clothing, so finished items, to material.
Right.
You see a lot of material taken as well. So with the thought of maybe selling the material outright, or there are some seamstresses that run away making garments.
Incredible
that they
skill
could
in
be
that
sold.
population of sewing that we're only, recently really being able to delve into and find more clues on. So.
Are there any records of people being caught because of trying to sell clothing?
I can't recall. I will say that they're committed to the jail ads, so we're very familiar with runaway ads. But on the opposite end of that are committed to the jail ads, and these are people that have been caught by different jailers in different counties. And usually the only way we can kind of connect the person who ran away to a person who's caught is if we can cross-reference by name or owner seeking to leave the person. But usually the detailing on that is not as good as the runaway ads. It'll usually mention the person's name,
Right.
who their master belongs to,
Right.
and who can come pay charges
Right.
to retrieve this person. But we know in local courts that sometimes there are instances of enslaved people. Theft of items was very serious, and if it was of a certain value, the penalty could be death. But there are some references of people who are enslaved, who are tried, some found guilty, some found not guilty of theft of material and those type of goods.
Deanna was curious about as the seasons change, do you see that reflected in runaway ads, or is there a consistency on the types and numbers of garments that are
Actually, you
taken?
do. It's interesting. The three women that are portrayed in our program all ran away in the spring and summer. But one of them actually was thinking ahead and took blankets and heavy cloaks and was either going north where she knew it was going to be cold or had some long-term planning involved. But yeah, they were layering the clothing just like everybody else was to stay warm.
And whereas Betty, when she ran, we know she had the two outfits that she took with her and sundry other clothes. So included that likely would have been garments with the intention that she was gonna be gone for a good long while.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tina asks if an owner would require a persistent runaway to wear something unique to serve as some sort of identification.
Well, it's very interesting, and thank you for the question. In doing some research, my husband has come across a man by the name of Peter, who belonged to John Custis, who was Martha Washington's first father-in-law. And Peter was such a consistent runaway that he had breeches made. And this is one of those examples where we have a description, and it's a lot of information, but we still don't quite know what it looks like.
Yeah.
He had breeches made to accommodate the fact that he was wearing shackles on his legs. So I know that's the one that comes to me specifically. And for as great as the description is, I'm not sure exactly what that looked like.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we definitely have hopes that our tailors and others will do a program on he had on when he ran away.
Yes.
Since milliners and mantua makers tend to stick to children and women's clothing, and of course millinery is all the ornament or accessory to the wardrobe for the family. But for fitted clothing, we were interested in the runaway women.
Yes.
Well, that leads beautifully into our next question, which comes from Christian, who is curious if we see in advertisements women described as wearing men's clothing.
Occasionally you do, yeah. What was the one you found you were talking about earlier this morning?
Yeah, it was two very interesting ads. Where one, it was an indentured servant and a young woman who ran, and the young woman was maybe about 18 or 19, and she ran in men's clothes, and they were running away under the guise of her being the waiting man of the indentured servant who ran away. And there was another one, and this is during the Revolutionary War years, of a woman who ran away with the French soldiers and had adopted the dress of the soldiers herself, and was passing herself off, as a soldier in the Revolutionary War that was serving alongside this regiment. So that is something that you do come across from time to time.
Yeah. And then every once in a while in the trades, you'll come across women who are in professions where they're dressing as men and working as well.
So Emily was curious if, as you've sifted through so many ads over the years, are there particular ones that for particular reasons have really stuck with you and resonated?
It would be hard to narrow it down to one. I think the overwhelming thing is we get a slice of humanity. We get a look into the lives of women which is across the river away from us, and she had recently been separated from her. I'm not sure if it was through sale or just transfer to a different property. And this owner puts this ad in the paper for several months. So it just struck me. He was so persistent. He was very bold in calling out Peyton Randolph's Carter, where he lists both of them by name, which is really just in pursuit of a child
Yeah.
who wanted to see her mother. And there's another one of a little boy who was brought to the Raleigh Tavern, which is just a few doors down the street from us. And he was quite young. I don't even know if he was 8 or 9 years old. And he somehow ended up at the Raleigh Tavern with this man who was making a delivery of corn and wheat. And he said he was from one place. The wagoner didn't know where he was from. And just to think of this child separated from his parents or whoever would have been looking for him at that property. Did he fall asleep in the wagon? Did he willingly, at that age, seek to self-liberate?
Yeah.
Those descriptions of those children in those positions, which it's a brave thing to do for anyone, but those really resonate with me.
Mine is actually an English reference. In the mid-1770s, there's a black carpenter who puts a newspaper advertisement. His wife has disappeared, and he fears that slavers have taken her to the West Indies. And that's the only mention you have. And it just absolutely hurts your heart.
Yeah, and you hope that they were able to reconnect somehow, but a lot of times when it's that snapshot, we're just left to wonder. Yeah.
So, some questions about fabric. Natalie was curious about linen in particular, if that would have been too expensive. So what kinds of fabric are we encountering most often?
What's brilliant about the 18th century is that a person could buy cotton, wool, linen, and silk at just about any price point. And so many of the enslaved women are running away with black silk hats or bonnets, or handkerchiefs. They have, linen shifts. They have linen clothing and petticoats, or printed cottons, striped cottons. So it's a wide range of fabrics based on the price, basically.
And I've seen every type of cloth in description.
Just hundreds of different varieties. In fact, one of them was a moreen, which is in this case, it was a wool that was actually calendared or had a heavy weight across it so that it looked like a watered silk, but it was in wool. Or a silk quilted petticoat, for instance.
So, we talked about the many articles that people might take with them. Deanna is asking, and maybe I think this is from a very practical point of view, how light were people packing or not packing? Is there any documentation of that? I mean, obviously, if there's a point at which you just can't bring any more because it's going to encumber you.
I've seen everything in between. I've seen runaway ads where people they've talked about them running with the clothes in their back, not even with stocking and shoes on their feet. And I've seen runaway ads, like one very good example is Lucy and Sarah, the other two women that are being portrayed, and she had on when she went away, where they're taking dozens of different items of clothing, and one of them even has a trunk to carry the clothing in, and
a bed rug.
I mean, all this stuff.
And a cloak, purple cloak. So again, the weight of what they're carrying could be spectacular.
And only rarely do you see someone running where they have, a cart in Betty's circumstance, a boat. Sometimes you see runaway ads where somebody is running with a horse, it's been by and large men. I can't say for sure that it's never been women, but to think that they are doing this on foot,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the weight of those clothing, is remarkable.
Well, in the
hmm
description that you portray,
hmm
didn't they take a boat and a
They
canoe?
took a boat, a canoe, so.
And it was
hmm
very well documented of how
hmm
long the keel of the boat was and how wide and how many, I mean,
Yeah, so a decent sized boat that the three of them took with them.
yeah.
So it can vary, but I would say most of the time it's at least a couple of outfits, um, and people are doing the traveling on foot. So things
Mm-hmm.
that they have to just carry themselves on their back. hmm
Tina mentions and then asks, given how remarkably specific these
hmm
ads are about clothing, how would the owners know that? Did they keep detailed inventories?
I don't know. If they kept inventories, none of them have survived, to the disappointment of historians, I would say. Um, Many of them look like it's just the recollection of the clothing that that the person putting the advertisement together has remembered them wearing. But just like today, if somebody disappears, they'll put the physical description, they will put the clothing of what they were wearing, last seen at,
hmm
and possibly where they think they might have been traveling to. And the 18th century is doing the exact same thing with these advertisements.
Yeah, the only inventory that I can think of off top was at the governor's palace, and I think it was Batatat or Fakir, where certain materials were being ordered. I think most of it was for men who would have been in livery,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there was some material for the women to wear,
Mm-hmm.
but that's about it. And it's also important to note that if you're talking about people who are running away from an urban center like a Williamsburg or a New York, a Savannah, a Charleston, a Philadelphia, people are going to be working together in close proximity. So here in Williamsburg, we're a city that's a mile long, half a mile wide, a little less than 2,000 people living in that very small space. So you're going to be familiar, with what these people are wearing in the summer as it gets to be colder. What might be new in that. So people, there's a closeness just by distance. There's a closeness that a lot of people may not realize as well.
So much of what we can get from these advertisements is a sense of what people wore regularly. They help us define probably what was normal. But in looking through them, are there things that you found that struck you as sort of very unusual or really interesting, maybe surprising?
Mm.
Um,
It's hard to pin it down to one, isn't it?
it is. I mean, my favorite example is that woman who was described because her hair was cut unusually. And they said that it was cut unevenly as a punishment. So that's a little startling.
Yeah.
Um,
One of my favorites is a woman named Rhoda, who they talked about, and she had this really neat jacket on with forms and figures of soldiers and carriages and horses. So just the cloth alone sounds really interesting. But they also made comment about how she combed her hair up over a large roll, and used a great deal of pomatum. So essentially, like this big pompadour that she was wearing, this jacket that she was wearing, and I think she also had a shrill voice to boot. So she definitely sticks with me, just like I'm imagining, the outfit with the hair and all of that.
Yeah.
Barbara's curious if enslaved people might all be wearing very similar clothes, cut from the same pattern of fabric. Is that something that we can ascertain from the records?
Well, I know if you're talking about people who are enslaved in a more rural setting, mostly dealing with tobacco, cotton, not cotton yet, I'm sorry, pardon me, tobacco, wool, uh, that type of thing. You see Osnaburg, which is so common it begins to be known as Negro cloth. But even if that's what they're wearing or they're being given, usually 2 sets for summer, 2 sets for winter, you see people adding to, making additions to, and adapting.
Right.
I would say clothing
Yeah.
more than anything else. Clothing, hair more than anything else.
And the clothes are designed as a gown or a jacket or a short sack and petticoat. And so this is no different in description. I mean, everybody has a gown or two or three. What I like about it from my perspective as a tradesperson is this gown can be made by a single person in about one work day. So it doesn't cost much. What makes it expensive or not expensive is the fabric.
And something that I've seen in a lot of runaway ads, and the prints that do exist are petticoats, like the one Janae is wearing, where it's kind of banded. So it could be something where as you grow taller, you can still get use of a garment. It could be something, as it's worn out, you can still have use of that garment, or it could just be fashionable. But that's something that I see a lot in ads and in the prints that we do have.
And it's normal for 18th century fashion to be updated, pieced, taken apart, reconstructed. So that would not be a social, indicator that, oh, they're wearing something that's patched. That's just normal 18th century procedure for, the economy of clothing.
Extending the life of the
Right.
garment. Yeah.
Right.
So speaking of adapting, adjusting, personalizing, maybe this is related to that. We had a question from Natalie for you, Hope. The scarf that you're wearing, is that only used in that way, or could you wear it in other ways? For even could it be a headwear or something?
Yeah. Well, the kerchief that I'm wearing is a triangle, and that's generally around the neck. The head wrap, the garment itself. That is wrapped around the head typically in the 18th century, 19th century in prints is something that's rectangular. So it's about 2 inches long, maybe about 12, 15, 20 or so inches wide, and it's wrapped. It can be wrapped around the head, around the base, what have you. But certainly, it's something that could be adapted. But typically, just again, in looking at the print and looking at the descriptions, I tend to see this type of head wrap more than often around the head and the triangles around the neck.
Or
Doug had a question that I'm sure a number of people have as well. And I know this we could not be exhaustive about this, but what are some good sources that online sources that people at home can go to find some examples of runaway ads?
Well, probably one of the best so far as
Yeah.
Searchability, free access is the geography of slavery. And when you Google the geography of slavery, it should be the first site that comes up. It's done in partnership with the University of Virginia. And if you want to search, whether it's men, women, a certain year, you can search by trade. You can search people who ran away. It's a lot of different ways to search. And really, a lot of this work, this exhaustive work of going through these runaway ads, which was started like in the early 20th century, where he would have had to go through and look at all these newspapers. Lathan Winley collected runaway ads from Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Maryland. So those are resources that would likely be available from a library. And for the images, there is a website. If you Google slavery images, it should come up with a map. And you can search images. So if you're looking for, what people were wearing, when they went to work, to market, what people were wearing when they had, a few moments to themselves. If you want to compare, what people were wearing in Africa as opposed to what they were wearing in the Caribbean as opposed to what they were wearing in the colonies. You could do that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah,
What,
18th century newspapers.
yes.
You know, of course, the Virginia Gazettes are all, you know, digitized, and you can browse those. There are other databases of 18th century American newspapers, 19th century. And all you really have to do is put runaway, and then sometimes I'll do runaway, blue stripe, and, you know, come up with all the different references to the runaways that had blue stripes on. You just keep looking. Or for runaway wives, you can say wife, elope. And of course, runaway apprentices and also servants.
There's a book, and I might be, forgive me if I'm getting the title wrong, but it's Runaway Servants, Slaves, and Wives, I think is a good entry point.
Yeah.
So it's a good collection of runaway ads from 13 colonies, and you have a mixture of those. It's a very short, easily accessible book. So from the youngest to the oldest, that's a good entry point if you're looking at women who are self-liberating from something.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one final question today. And given the nature of this research being so ongoing, I'm curious to know what's next, and in particular, are there specific articles of clothing or other objects that you've seen in advertisements that you're hoping to recreate sometime in the near future?
Well, I have two. One is a woman named Jenny who ran away from Philadelphia, and you know she has a lot of things, kind of like Betty and Lucy do, the other two women in our program, but her owner made a point to specify that she was fond of wearing Queen's Knights caps, and you know had a great deal, many of them, what have you. And so I looked up these Queen's Knights caps, and they're just these beautiful, intricate, lovely caps that probably have to be starched, what have you. So I would love to see that. And then the other is not a runaway ad, but it's a description of a free black fiddler who lived in Williamsburg and later in Richmond, by the name of Cy Gillett. And he had, it was either 30 or 50 suits of clothing, and his favorite color was a lilac, so probably not too far from what Janae is wearing. And it talks about, you know, the wig he wore with it, and his stockings being clean, and his shoes, and how before he sat down to play, he had to dust his chair. So I would love to see somebody step into that role of Cy Gillett at some point in time.
Yeah. And I would love to continue studying the styles and the different colors and the variety of clothing. This program was one in the 1760s, one in the 1770s, one in the 1780s. They all ran away with jackets. And of course, jackets over those 30-year period would just be wonderful to study, as well as earlier or later in the century.
Well, Janae and Hope, thank you both so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and passion and talents with us all, and everyone watching at home. Thank you for your wonderful comments and questions. This program has been made possible by a generous grant from Ferguson Enterprises, and we are grateful to them. To learn how you can support presentations like this, please follow the link pinned to the comments below or visit us at colonialwilliamsburg.org. Hope and Janae, do you have any final thoughts to send everyone on our way?
I would say pick up one of those books, check out the geography of slavery. For a lot of women, this is their memorial. This is all we know about them as that slice of life. So take a moment to look at them, think about these names, think about these women. They say a person only dies twice, when they actually pass, and the last time their name is spoken. So look at these ads, think about these women, speak their names, hope that the best happened for them in those circumstances. But just get to know them.
I agree. That's wonderful.
Thank you.